Book 10 Anasta. What will these people come to? Torrents of water from the melting glacier formed a large river. Its raging current swept up rocks and fallen trees as it went. It washed off and carried away the fertile topsoil, along with vegetation and everything living in it. But the family valley that people had been forced was left untouched by the fearsome stream. Foliage on the trees yellowed and fell off, and there was no singing of birds to be heard. A number of the plants continued fighting for their lives, adapting to the cooling that was unusual, and amazingly enough, Anasta's favourite flower still remained in her once very lovely flower bed. The valley was shielded by the ridge of mountains, atop one of which the little girl Anasta had fallen into a sleep that would last thousands of years. Two athletic youths, one light-haired and one dark-haired, stood at the foot of the mountain. They were looking at a huge block of granite that extended out over the grounds. Drops of water were forcing their way along both sides. The dark-haired youth spoke with joyful schadenfreude. "That's what they get, these people who've lost their sense. Little by little, sometime in the next 2 days, the water will gradually wash away the support around the rock and it will collapse, opening up a path for the death-dealing torrent to make its way into the valley. The water will rush like a powerful waterfall, tearing off and carrying the mountain rocks away with it. And little by little it will erode the entire mountain and carry it away. Once the torrent that's coming in on the right of the mountain has thrown this giant rock aside, it will rush into the crevice that forms, making it larger and larger, and it will change direction. Yes, if this block collapses in the next 2 days before the torrent reaches the sloping lands beyond the valley and floods it, thereby lessening the water pressure, then it will rush with all its strength into Anastashka's family valley," the light-haired youth agreed, and he added, "Now I regret having taken form in a human body. Right now we need an animal with a powerful body to prop up this block." "Ha ha, he regrets he's not a powerful animal. Sure, you could have adopted its appearance, but then you would have had to resemble it too. You wouldn't have been able to speak like a human and realise that the block will soon be carried away by the torrent." "Yep, what are you gibbering on and on about with your family valley and your Anastashka? It's all the same to her now. Her soul is soaring in the immense universe." "Soaring, yes," Lighthead said thoughtfully and tenderly. "The thought has been carefully preserved in it, and the dream. Awareness, great knowledge, all the same, she really did manage to stop the glacier. The daughter of God grasped the power of human thought through her feelings. She altered God's plan a tiny bit." "Exactly, a tiny bit. And how much slobbery tenderness is there in your words? Just a tiny bit, I might add. A tiny bit. And you?" "She grasped it through her feelings, and daughter of God," Dark-haired said, mockingly mimicking him. Speaking with abandon, he went on, "The raging torrent will rush into the valley anyway. It's rushing after the crowd of idiots who don't even suspect that they themselves, and their thoughts and actions that drew them away from the natural and toward the artificial, are the cause of the disaster. For now their aspirations are still in the beginning stages. But we know how destructive these aspirations are for them, and for the earth, and for the whole universe. And so that they don't suffer, and so that they don't tear the surface of the earth to bits, they will be destroyed, in accord with God's program. At the very beginning stages of the disastrous aspiration, the raging torrent will overcome them. A huge, roaring tidal wave of water, rocks, fallen tree trunks and corpses of the formerly living will make its way unforgivingly toward them. At first, when they hear the rumbling behind them, they'll feel something is wrong and pick up their pace. but the rumbling will grow, and off in the distance they'll see a huge wall moving toward them, bringing death. For them it will signify the flood. They will all be gripped by terror. Their mammoth elephants, their kittens, their children and their old folk, and their souls will fly up into the universe, retaining within them only the horrors. With a kind of venomous passion, Dark-Haired began using facial expressions and gestures to portray these people who had been gripped by terror. Mothers pressing their infants to their breast, people who had knelt down with their hands stretched out to the heavens, feverishly praying for mercy. Others running with their last ounce of strength and shouting. Darkhead began running around in a circle, wailing, showing terror on his face. Then he stopped, glancing in the direction of the people who were leaving, and said, "My pale-faced brother, do you get it? Do you get what kind of unavoidable destiny will overcome these people?" And so that little girlie asleep on the mountain didn't change God's program in any substantial way. The way you've modelled the human nature is not to my liking, brother. We, universal entities, can probably take some action. It's not our business to remain indifferent. When we're indifferent, then we do not exist. What does the future care about your to my liking, not to my liking, if it's unavoidable? Dark-Haired sneered. Without waiting to hear his brother's answer, he turned sharply and saw his light-haired brother had gone to stand beneath the granite block, and all on his own, with his shoulders and arms, propped it up. The streams of water flowing around the edges of the block became significantly smaller. "Idiotic, senseless, and irrational," Dark-Haired said after a brief pause. Then he was silent a bit longer, as if deliberating about something, and then he began shaming his brother with newfound strength, attempting to prove the senselessness of his actions. "There's no one here, and thus there's no one to laugh at your total idiocy. Before you went to stand under that granite block, you didn't even take the time to calculate how much it weighs. The water's still oozing through, and the supports holding the granite up are eroding, and that means more and more weight will be pressing down on you. Do you understand that, you pale-faced idiot? By force of my will, I will condense to the density of the granite, and I'll be able to hold my ground. I only need hold out for 2 days. I'll hold out," said the light-haired athlete. "Right, I'll hold out, I'll condense. Well, go on then, condense away, and the density of the granite, to the density of the granite. But what's your load-bearing surface area? Your load-bearing surface area is the size of the soles of your 2 feet, and along toward the middle of the second day, the whole burden will come to rest upon you, and you'll sink into the ground like some kind of granite stake, shoving the smaller rubble off to the sides. As soon as you sink in up to your knees, the torrent of water will shove the block aside. I'll straighten my arms out, then I'll be able to hold out half a day more." "Yes, of course you'll hold out, only not for half a day. You'll hold out maybe for an hour or more, you clueless blockhead. Then there'll be a landslide. For all of eternity, since the moment of creation, never once has God's program experienced a glitch, and I'm in agreement with it, given that mankind is stepping onto an absurd path of development. It's better to put them down at the beginning of their path. Maybe a new civilization on Earth will comprehend its life purpose, and then we'll comprehend. The universe will see new deeds, not today's primitivism. Numerous times the Earth has experienced disasters that have washed away the filth that man accumulated. Who is it you want to save? Mankind, which with its very own hands will, in the future, create a living hell for itself and everything living on Earth. Do I need to remind you where the technocratic path will drag them off to in the future? Should I remind you Why don't you say something? Ah, excellent. You're condensing and petrifying. Are you already having a hard time talking? Don't talk, then. Excellent. Stand there like a stone idol and look. Look at the pictures of the future life of the people you're trying to save. I've always admired them. There's the most enlightened folly, absurdity, and vanity in them. But you don't like looking at them, these pictures. Go on and look now, my pale-faced, petrifying, motionless one. Look. But no, first listen and hear what you don't want to hear. If those who have left the valley aren't destroyed, they'll follow their technocratic path. They'll multiply, and from one generation to the next, they'll break, destroy, and remould the great earthly harmony. And they'll kill animals who are meant to serve them. They'll construct a multitude of various soulless devices out of completely living material. They'll start referring to their actions using the resonant words industrialization, scientific, and technical progress, and they'll invest these words with the implication of intelligent development. Well, and what kind of development? Do they possess rationality? Are they developing in a rational way? Like crazy folk, they will destroy unsurpassed creations and call their own barbaric actions progress. They are ill. A virus has taken up residence in their minds, and the epidemic will smite all of mankind. This virus is more terrible than the complete annihilation of everything on Earth. It threatens the entire universe. It is called, have you already guessed what word I am going to utter now? More than once you've beseeched me not to repeat it, and have turned away from me and hurried to walk off, away from me. But now you won't turn away, you won't walk off. What will strike this whole human civilization is anti-rationality. Struck by this anti-rationality, mankind will enter into the virus dimension. It will begin performing deeds unsurpassed in their idiocy and villainy, cloaking them in the words progress, advanced, moral, lovely, rational, and spiritual when they speak to each other. Now that's some kind of development, right? Now, I can't get by without a visual here. Now take a look. The dark-haired youth traced a square in the air with his hand, and a hologram immediately appeared inside it. The hologram showed a 12-story building being built. Two cranes were raising building materials up to the already complete stories. People in orange hard hats and blue overalls who were busy doing the finishing work on the dwellings could be seen through the window openings. The dark-haired youth commented, "This incomprehensible thing here with a great number of cells, they're going to call that a home. Anti-rationality is turning people into anti-people. They have distorted the concept and the meaning behind the words my home. They've replaced the home, a living space formed by a person's thought and reflecting his thought capacity, with an artificial stone cell, and they've called it a home, as some kind of travesty of rationality. The universe is not in need of their limited thought. It is becoming a breeding ground for anti-rationality and develops and strengthens its might. And this breeding ground is growing larger and larger." The hologram stretched out from horizon to horizon, showing the building of multitude little boxes with artificial stone cells. Some of them were collapsing, but the people in the orange hard hats were erecting new, even taller stone structures with a multitude of cells in their place. Dark-haired continued, "To gain the right to live in these cells, they will have to perform deeds that aren't proper for a rational being. Man, children of God, goddesses, Take a look, my pale-faced brother, take a look at these deeds. The dark-haired youth waved his hand once more, and a square with a hologram appeared once again. This time it showed a huge grocery store. A great many people were gathering all manner of items to purchase, placing them in metal baskets and walking up to one of those cash registers arranged in a row to pay for the goods they'd chosen. These are the beings from the stone cells. Every day they engage in various deeds that are worthless in terms of rationality, and they call their deeds work. For their work they receive slips of paper that they call money. Here you see them exchanging the money they've received for food. In the beginning, God created everything so that all a rational person had to do was stretch out his hand and take the divine creation that was to his liking and enjoy consuming it, thereby increasing the energy inside him and satisfying his body. But these beings have altered their way of life so much that there's none of God's food around them. The food they acquire in exchange for the slips of paper does not possess divine energy. The beings who have created this way of life cannot be called rational. Their way of life is the result of anti-rationality. The picture in the square changed, and now it was showing a close-up of a female cashier. One after another, people would come up to her cash register and lay out this or that kind of package, boxes and cans and bottles, on a little table in front of the woman. Smiling, the woman would say hello to each of them. She'd take the packages, pass them over some kind of little pane of glass, after which numerals representing the product's price would light up on the cash register. The cashier would take some money from the person and say to him, smiling again, "Thank you for your purchase. Come again, visit us soon." And now there was a close-up in the square, showing the woman's face at the moment when she turned away from the people who were standing in line and bent down to the floor to pick up a bag that had fallen. She turned away from the people standing before her for only a few seconds, and some kind of sad and doomed expression appeared on her face. Her eyelids began to close a bit, betraying an incredible weariness. The woman picked the bag up with one hand and pressed the other to her side, wincing in pain. All of this lasted just a very short time. When she turned back to the people, there was a smile on her face once more. And once more, she said to each one, "Hello, thank you for your purchase. Come visit us again." The dark-haired youth commented, "You see, my brother, before you is a being called a goddess. She sits behind a register made up of a multitude of little screws and circuits, and she herself is less perfected than those little screws. The register has no soul and no rationality. It just acts in accord with its prescribed program. Now this being sits behind it 12 hours a day, tapping away at its keys and saying thank you to every person. What's this being thanking each person who comes up for? For nothing. It is simply a robot. It should have rationality, but it sits and taps away at the keys at some register for 12 hours at a time. It will do that for half its life, so that it can finally end up in a stone cell. Rationality wouldn't have allowed something like that to take place, so that means that the anti-rationality virus is at work in her. That this woman is not a person, but an anti-person, and that she is located in the dimension of anti-rationality. Her internal organs have been petrified. She does not receive normal food, and the blood in her veins is solidifying and stagnating because she has to sit for 12 hours at a time. She looks older than her years. Look, this is the way she should look at her age if she were in the dimension of rationality, if she were a person. Now I'll show you her in the natural dimension at this same time. Look. A new hologram in the square showed a slender, blonde beauty running along the side of a brook toward a naked little boy, her son. The beauty ran up to him, scooped him up in her arms, and spun around, bursting into happy laughter. The two women, living in different dimensions, bore little resemblance to each other. The supermarket cashier, sitting at the register, appeared in the square once more. "This is just one little isolated instance," Dark-Haired said. "Would you say it's totally uncharacteristic of all mankind? Take a look." Next he spread his arms out, and the picture in the square spread out from horizon to horizon, and a picture appeared. Hundreds of thousands of people were sitting behind various registers in tightly packed rows, tapping away at the keys. They were varied, these people, very young girls and elderly women, and there were some men too. Then a picture appeared in space. Hundreds of thousands of hands were tapping away incessantly at the register's keys. In the corner of the boundless screen, the sun appeared, then the moon replaced it. Then the sun appeared again, replacing a half-moon. The daytime and nighttime luminaries measured off the days and months and years like a clock. But the people who had filled the entire space from horizon to horizon kept on tapping away at the keys of their registers, repeating, as if they were robots, "Hello, thank you for your purchase, come visit us again." Look, my brother, take a look. Now it will get even more interesting. Take a look at mankind's future. A hologram appeared in space, showing a close-up of a person running with a sword in his hands, his face distorted by rage. It was replaced by a picture of a person lying on the ground in the mud, spraying gunfire. Then 3 people appeared who were shooting a cannon, and the entire space suddenly filled up with a multitude of people. They were shown as very tiny, so that more of them would fit into the space with swords, pitchforks, scythes, machine guns and cannons. The people were cutting each other down and shooting at each other. They were strangling each other with their hands and kicking them with their feet. From up above, flying machines were dropping objects down onto the ground that was teeming with a mass of people. Upon reaching the ground, the objects would explode, sending up clumps of mud and the remains of human bodies. Did rational beings create this mess, my brother? And they're anti-rational because they've taken into their heads to justify this too. They'll call this mess war. They'll give various decorations to those who excel in this slaughter, and the ones who receive these medals will proudly wear them on their chest. They'll learn to pass laws that justify this slaughter that will go on for centuries without ceasing. Dark-Haired waved his hands once more, and a hologram appeared in the space once more, divided into a great many squares. Each square showed the interior of various halls where people were sitting and listening to people speaking from rostrums. They have different names for this: a congress, parliament, Duma, or a house, but they're all essentially the same thing. Do you see the people sitting there, my brother? You can still see, so take a look. The people sitting before you are writing laws for various peoples. And if you lump them all together, for all mankind, they've been writing them for millennia. But there are no perfected laws, nor can there be. Do you get that, my brother? Of course you get it. Dark-Haired roared with laughter. His spiteful laughter filled the valley, and its echo bounced off the ridge of the mountain. He stopped laughing and, turning into the pictures with the people sitting in them, shouted, as if they could hear and understand him. You'll never be able to write perfected laws because you don't know the most important thing. You don't know the life's purpose of each separate man and of mankind as a whole. This life's purpose, the universal life's purpose, has been expressed in just 4 words. It is the foundation of all laws. It, and only it, can string along all the earth's laws onto itself like beads onto a thread, or repulse them. but you don't know what it is. You've forgotten it. Do you get it, my brother? They've forgotten the most important thing. And now they're in the dimension of anti-rationality. They've forgotten that their life's purpose has been laid out in 4 words. What are those? What words are those? Do you want me to utter them, my brother? You do. Of course you do. Very much. You're always uttering them in the hope that they'll hear you and understand. You utter them, but they don't hear. They don't hear because they're located in the dimension of anti-rationality. And if I utter them, if you and I utter them together, they'll hear. They'll start to take action and they'll become people. But I won't utter them. Let me deliberate until the next worldwide disaster, which will be unprecedented in scale and strength. It will approach inexorably, and they will be powerless to use their laws to stop it from approaching. These beings know of the approaching disaster. They even know why it will occur. And they can't manage to change their way of life. They can't manage at all. If you look at them, they still resemble people, but only on the outside. They themselves, just think about it, my brother, for centuries they themselves have been inventing various mechanical substitutes for human capabilities. Just look what they're turning into. A hologram appeared in space. The right side showed the handsome, well-proportioned body of a youth, clad only in a loincloth, while the left side showed a girl in a short little grass skirt. Between them was a circle filled with a great many small, multicoloured circles. In the circle, I'm showing the capabilities with which each man was endowed inherently. They were capable of much. Night replaced day in the hologram. The young man glanced up at the heavens and said, "Today in the heavens above me, 9,082 stars can be seen." "My love," the girl said, replying to the youth, "right now in the heavens above you, 9,083 stars can be seen. There's one you didn't notice. It's not at all bright. I will wait for you on it. We will create a space of love on it, and it will begin to shine with a bright blue light. For the time being, our star is barely noticeable." "Yes, they were capable of much," Dark-Haired commented. "Their initial capabilities enabled them to create everything you can imagine, and even things you can't. But once they start inventing mechanical, non-rational capability substitutes, they begin losing their God-given talents. Calculating devices appeared one after another and then disappeared. And as each of the instruments appeared, several of the little circles decreased in size, some of them actually turning into black dots. They used to be capable of counting all the stars by glancing at the sky for just an instant, but they'll get to the point in their inventions that they'll be calculating 2 plus 2 on calculators. They'll invent the telephone, and will begin losing the ability to communicate over distance and imagine their loved ones' whereabouts. In the end, they'll begin implanting artificial devices into their bodies," Dark-Haired went on, "and they themselves will turn more and more into a primitive, soulless device. It will be impossible to call them people. Their rationality is stuffed down somewhere deep inside. Anti-rationality dominates them. It is simultaneously around them and within them. Take a look, my brother. Now you'll see my final little picture." Dark-Haired waved his hand, and on the screen, in the steaming air, hovering in the air, was a folded out map of the earth. That part of it where people lived very densely in the cities, and in each city the stout tentacles of some monstrously large being were wending their way between the large concentrations of people, weaving in and out and shuddering. They were great in number. They encircled the cities and were also located inside them. Some kind of foul-smelling, dark-coloured gas was being emitted from the great number of pores on each tentacle. But the people weren't shrinking back from these terrifying emissions, they were breathing them in. The people were building their homes close to the tentacles. From time to time, first in one spot and then in another, the reeking tentacles would burst, seemingly due to great pressure, and the people would rush to patch and smooth out these blowouts so as to restore the monstrous octopus' vital functions. My brother, do you see the tentacles of the monstrous octopus? Perhaps you want me to show you the body of the monster that has covered the world with its tentacles? Naturally, you don't even want to think and speak about this, but I'll tell you right where this death-dealing body is located. I'll tell you where the tentacles are coming from. They're coming from the brains of these beings who used to be considered rational people. The monster's body is inside their brains. It's where they're all coming from, and they are proud of their death-dealing progeny. They cherish it. They call the monstrous tentacles roads and highways. Dark-haired roared with laughter. There you have it, the future of mankind. And you want to save those who are heading for the dimension of anti-rationality? You want to save them from that fate? Dark-haired asked, turning to his brother, who was holding the block of granite back, keeping it from falling. It wasn't just little drops of water that were seeping around the block of granite anymore. Now the water was flowing around it in thin streams. The body of the light-haired youth supporting the block of granite was petrifying even more intensely. Even his facial muscles had hardened, and he could neither speak nor blink. Only his blue eyes, still alive, were looking at the pictures of mankind's future. The dark-haired youth stuck his palm beneath the stream of water that was running off and said, his voice full of venom, "There's precious little time left before the flood. Maybe I'd have time to say 3 or 4 more phrases to you, my brother, but I'm not going to say anything. Most likely you can't hear me anymore." The dark-haired youth spread his arms out to the sides, then bent his elbows, amusing himself with his athletic muscles, then shook his head, tossing his black locks of hair back. He spent a bit more time observing the streams of water flowing around the block of granite his brother was propping up, watching them grow stronger. Then he said, "It's time for me to be going. It's time. Now what has been preordained had to come to pass shall come to pass. But it shall not come to pass." The dark-haired athlete strode up to the block of granite, and taking his place alongside his light-haired brother, propped up the block of granite with his own shoulders and arms. The muscles of the athletic body tensed and the veins stood out, but the dark-haired athlete slowly straightened out his slightly bent knees and raised the granite a bit. The water stopped seeping around the edges of the block, only a few drops were still rolling off it. The universal opposites united in one for a short time, having changed God's program. Perhaps by uniting, they had opened up new possibilities for the program. After a short time, the raging, shattering torrent reached the plains, and the danger that Anasta's family valley would be flooded passed, and along with it, the danger that the people who had left the valley would perish. The light-haired youth's petrification began to gradually pass. A smile came to his face, and he regained his ability to speak. "Thank you, brother," Light-haired said, albeit still with difficulty. "Only I don't need any of your thank yous. This disaster that was predestined for people, it's past. Now they'll go even further along in their absurd worldview. They'll stubbornly construct the anti-world. There will be more of them, and there will be a new disaster on a bigger scale." There won't be one, brother. Maybe it'll happen just an instant before any disaster happens, but the soul particles and feelings and knowledge that the little girl Anasta dissolved in the space will awaken within people's hearts. And a great many women and men will stop the unprecedented disaster with their thoughts, and people living in the dimension of anti-rationality will suddenly see the light. They'll begin to build a new world on Earth, never before seen by anyone. They, the ones who have simultaneously experienced both anti-rationality and rationality, will unite what is opposite within themselves in harmony, and they will bring to life the divine impulse of his dream in matter and spirit. Not simply will they bring it to life, to it they will add their dream's perfection. Anastasia fell silent, and I was silent too, as I tried to make sense of what had been said and seen. Only after an hour or two did I ask her a question. End of that chapter. Book 10, Anasta. Coming face to face with our primeval image. Anastasia, everything you showed me and told me about the dark-haired and light-haired youths and about the little girl Anasta, did all of that exist in reality, or only in your imagination? You can choose your own answer to that question yourself, Vladimir. What do you mean I can choose it myself? You're the only one who can say for certain whether it actually happened or whether you imagined it. Tell me, Vladimir, did any new information appear to you from my story? Sure did. Of course it did. Information and images, I'll say. So that means the information exists? Yes, it exists. I need to analyse it, make sense of it, and I have questions. If information appeared, then it follows that its source also exists. Of course, there has to be a source. Information is an image. An image is information. If someone decides he wants to erase information within you, he'll try to prove to you that the image doesn't exist in reality. And as soon as you agree with the image lack of reality, then you yourself erase the information you've taken in from the image. Well, but if this or that image was created by a person, then who's the information coming from in that case? From the image. Why from the image, if some specific person created it? If a child was born to you, Vladimir, a child who imparted new information to all people, including to you too, then who is the source of the new information? The child, of course, but an image, now, an image isn't a child who has a material body. An image can be non-material too. So, does that mean the difference lies only in that in the first case you can see a material body, but in the second you can't? Maybe that's not quite it. It's just that when there's a body, it looks more familiar somehow, more credible. A body who can see bears no definitive evidence, and what's more, it can lead you astray. Now that's true, it sure can. There's even an article in the criminal code called fraud. That's when a criminal who has a body deceives someone for his own personal gain. I think I've got everything, Anastasia. If information appears, and what's more, if it comes from an image, then all of that exists. You can't deny it. And we need to analyse the information we've received. But when we get caught up in thinking about it, does it exist or doesn't it exist, then we're wasting time and depriving ourselves of the information we've gained. Yes, you've understood correctly, Vladimir. There's just one thing I don't get. If every person can think up an image, and the image begins to exist, then how much information do we have to sift through in order to come up with what's genuine? Not much at all. Certainly every person can think up an image, but people will not accept every image with their whole heart and soul, not at all. Well, yes, of course, not every image. Really, thank you, Anastasia. It's interesting what you have to say about the image. Tell me something else about the image. What's your opinion? What is it? Man himself is, in fact, an image that has taken material form. And since he is a materialized image, man himself can use his thought to create and can materialize images. This is where his universal power, a power unsurpassed by no one and no thing, lies. If this or that person doesn't recognize the capabilities within him that have been given him by the Creator, then that person himself blocks his lofty power and falls under the influence of other images and materializes their thoughts, until finally he destroys himself, his family line, his state, and the whole planet. The artificial, technocratic world was also created by man using the energy of an image suggested to man by his antipodes. The technocratic world is fragile and transitory. Even the most advanced car, building, or any other object of the artificial world disintegrates with each second, and within but a few years turns to dust, or worse still, into waste products harmful for man. Man himself, by living in the artificial world, becomes fragile and transitory as well, for it is hard for a person who spends each minute looking at a multitude of disintegrating objects that lack autogenic capability to imagine eternal life, create the image of his own eternity and materialize it. The natural world that is visible to us has existed not for billions of years, but for significantly longer. For at the beginning it already existed within an as yet non-materialized image. The scientist who determined the Earth's age calculated not the date of its birth, but merely the date of its materialization as one of the stages of its life. The natural world possesses the capability for autogenesis, and this capability renders it eternal. The Creator who created eternity is himself the very same. He is Alpha and Omega, and Alpha once more. A great many people might say or think, what was there before the birth of the Creator and of his extraordinary multitudinous energies? At one time nothing existed, nothing, but recall what the Creator said about nothing to his Son. Out of nothing will arise the beautiful new birth of you, and of the aspiration reflecting your soul and dream. My Son, you are infinite, eternal. Within you lie your creating dreams. But if out of nothing arises something, that means that nothing too takes part in the birth. By giving birth out of nothing, in part, the Creator completed the circle and presented to man the image of eternity. The knowledge, understanding and perception of the energy of the image within him enable man to not die, but rather to drift off into an embryosal sleep. Upon awakening, he incarnates in the spot, time and image necessary to him and created by him before his sleep. Gaining knowledge of the science of imagery leads to understanding the entire universe created by the Creator, and to the creation of new and beautiful worlds. Lack of knowledge and understanding of the science of imagery leads unavoidably to unskillful interaction with the perfected natural world, and to the creation of an artificial, primitive, unnatural world. Lack of knowledge of the science of imagery turns entire states and peoples into puppets, into chess pieces in the hands of those who are acquainted with this great gift. But Anastasia, after all, images can be positive and negative. How are we supposed to figure out which of them bears useful information and which is misinforming us, perhaps for personal gain? Through your own self, Vladimir, and through your own image you will discern the value of any information. You mean every person has an image? Why, of course, Vladimir. Every person has his own image. Each differs strikingly from the others. Were every person to preserve his primeval image, then tell me, Vladimir, how would the world now look? Primeval, that means every person has, or used to have, a primeval image. What was it like? Divine, such as the way our parent, the Creator, did create it in his inspired impulse. It, our primeval image, was it God or what? It was the Son of God, and so it remains. But where's this primeval image of man gotten to? We can see images of drunks and drug addicts on the streets, and images of prostitutes along the roads, and various images make fools of themselves on TV. Where can we get a glimpse of man's primeval image? Within ourselves. Imagine it yourself. Go out to meet it, and joyfully will it rush toward you. Joyful will the path be, gradually coming nearer and nearer to each other. You will one day encounter each other. You will reunite. Safeguard your primeval image. Do not give it over to others for their own delight. But how can I imagine it? There's all sorts of information raining down on us about how man's imperfect. First they say he's an eternal slave, then that he's like a lab rat. One of my friends told me a while back that he read in some book somewhere that they said something like some alien beings created people and are now feeding on their energy and are training them to be imbeciles. Should you wish to be an imbecile, Vladimir, then go ahead and believe them. Should you believe you're a slave, you will give birth to a slave within you. Should you believe that someone is feeding on your energy against your very will, you will waste away and really will give over your own energy. Everything exists that you yourself believe to exist. From the very moment of birth, they try to belittle the significance of man, the Son of God. But take note, Vladimir, behind this there always stands someone striving to elevate himself. He is, in actual fact, not elevated when compared to man, and is unable to elevate himself, and only one path is left to him, to belittle the elevated one and prevent him from growing. Yes, Anastasia, you're exactly right here. I somehow can't recall even a single book or movie where man is presented as the strongest being in the universe. It's always the aliens that emerge as the strongest, and if the people are strong too, then it's always connected to some otherworldly powers. Now I understand what serious and ongoing indoctrination man is being subjected to. And of course, it's no accident. There's somebody who needs this very much. If man really were weak and didn't possess some kind of mysterious and unknown power, then why be afraid of him? Why take such pains to prove the opposite? Anastasia, you're the only one who sees man as the Son of God and the strongest being in the universe. But that means that a great many other images will come out in opposition of your explanation of what man's image is. They have methods that have been developed over the course of millennia. They've already created a great many images of powerless people. Plus, many various teachings that belittle man, the press the world over is working for them, and the screenwriters and directors too, and there are a lot of them, really a lot. Looks like you're on your own, Anastasia, but all the same, you're placing your hopes on something. Where are you placing them? Where, Anastasia? On my very own primeval image, and on your primeval image, Vladimir. On the primeval nature of those images of the people building homesteads. Those who will in the future set off to meet their true image. Anastasia, and they also say you don't exist at all. And about me, they say I'm not the person I seem to be, not the way I appear in the books. Now I see that by doing what they're doing, they're trying to erase the coming from your image, erase it in people, and they're succeeding in part. Even among those who are building family homesteads, who say, hey, not mention Anastasia's name, let's not talk about the books, and let's not call our homesteads family homesteads, given that someone has convinced the authority names are bad. They even offer them various concessions for doing that. And you, Vladimir, how do you feel about suggestions of that sort? To tell the truth, Anastasia, even I had the thought that, given that these words are irritating to some people, maybe it would be better not to utter them. You know, so things would move along more quickly. Now I get that the process might move along on the surface, but it won't be in quite the direction man needs. Now I get it. They don't want us to utter the words Anastasia, family homesteads, and ringing cedars of Russia, because strong images and information immediately come up once we do. They want to deprive people of them. Am I understanding things correctly? Of course, Vladimir. Behind each word there really does stand an image and information. It is sometimes the case that behind just one word there stands such a huge volume of information that it would be impossible for even 100 volumes to reflect its image, to substitute for it. Well, you know, there are words that awaken different images in people. For example, the word war. Some people might see a liberating war behind this word, and others an invasive one. But nonetheless, when this word is uttered, in people's imaginations there immediately arise a great many pictures of battles, of warring countries, of weaponry, and many other things. And even if the pictures are a bit different, this is of no consequence. They are great in number and similar, but there is but one word. Family homestead. Can there be a great many different images behind these words too? Family homestead is a word combination backed by the most powerful of images. Images capable of settling a person in a divine dwelling land. Judge for yourself, Vladimir. The first 3 letters of this word combination form the word Rod. Rod means the people who come into life one after another, and the first of these came from God. Each person born today takes his place at the head of his great chain. It is within his power to settle his rod in one dwelling land or another, in a stone cell or in the beautiful space of his family's homestead. Or he can break the family chain altogether. It is within his power to nourish his family with divine creation, or with food that doesn't bear the energy of the soul. What does food have to do with anything here, Anastasia, if my family's ancestors are long dead? Tiny parts of all your ancestors live on within you, Vladimir. Both your bodily and your spirit come from them, your body. Well, sure, they come from them, but that means that each person born anew bears a colossal responsibility for the fate of the entire family line. Yes, each one bears it, Vladimir, and each one is given the power to decide his own fate and the fate of his family line. I agree that we're given that power, but the great majority of people don't really think about their family line, and maybe their ancestors didn't think about it either. So does that mean the family line that stretches from the wellspring people from God himself has disintegrated, fallen to pieces, that it no longer exists? Family homestead, please. Vladimir, think about it. Family homestead. 2 words. 1 word combination. As soon as a person utters it, then the person, who perhaps hasn't yet even fully realized his aspiration, except subconsciously, has given voice to it I gather together my entire family line and settle it here. Aho, end of that paragraph. The gatherer of one's family line. A person who has established his family homestead can gather together within it the souls of people from his family line, and they will be grateful to him for this great deed. Like guardian angels, they will protect and guard the family homestead and the person who created it. Nothing in the universe disappears without a trace. It only passes from one state into another. When a person dies and his mortal body is given over to the land, then trees and grass and flowers grow up out of it. It passes from one state into another. But then, into what state does the main energetic complex, the human soul, pass? At first it lingers, hovering at the place where the person's body is located, and in some religions people understand this and don't immediately commit the person's body to the earth. And when the person's body does join into an embrace with the earth, when the person is buried in a cemetery, then the soul hovers above the spot where the body has been buried. The relative spends some period of time near the grave. The soul, deprived of its body, and so of hearing and sight, cannot see or hear, but it can feel when people are speaking of it or thinking of it. If they're saying good things, the soul feels good, but if they're saying bad things, the soul feels bad. Then the people leave the cemetery. For a certain period of time, the soul remains above the mound of earth where its body is buried, but it no longer feels anything, only emptiness. Modern people, caught up in everyday bustle of life, quickly forget their deceased relatives. In modern people's apartments, often nothing at all serves as a reminder of the deceased relatives. After a year or 5 or 10, basically no one remembers them anymore, and the souls of the deceased end up in a complete void. And we are speaking here about the recently deceased. But you know, there are also those relatives who lived 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years ago, and they all find themselves in complete oblivion. A person who creates a family homestead can gather together his entire family line. To do this, he needs to call to mind his relative and imagine him or her, and then the soul will give a little start. It will sense it's being thought of, and no matter in which corner of the universe it might be located, it will shoot off along his thought ray to the place from which it is emanating. A person isn't able to remember all his relatives and continually think about them and recall them, but he can plant a small grove of trees, preferably family trees, that live a long time. These include oaks and cedars. As he plants them, he should definitely contribute his own family thought, saying to himself, I am planting this grove or alley in memory of the members of my family line. I am creating a family homestead, and may all the members of my family line who have lived in the past and who will live in the future gather together on it. As he plants each individual tree, it's essential that he recall the name of one or another relative who has recently passed, and to imagine each of them and say a kind word about them. A person isn't able to recall each of his family members every minute and every hour, but the trees which have received this information will preserve it within themselves every moment. The souls of the relatives of your family line will sense this, and they'll live in your homestead in the trees, the blades of grass and the flowers. The rays emanating from the trees are much weaker than those coming from people, but they are more constant. The souls will sense this, and at first the soul of the closest relative you've recalled will come to this spot, and after it comes, others will also gradually be drawn to this spot too. In 9 years there will grow up a grove of trees that were planted by the person, and these will be extraordinary trees. They will possess colossal beneficial energy,
No one will be able to sense this energy's benefits, no one except the gatherer of the family line himself and his close relatives. Imagine, Vladimir, what an extraordinary and kind thing it is that man will accomplish. He, like unto the Creator, will gather together anew his family line that had scattered through time. But Anastasia, you said that the souls are an energetic complex, and that when people die, some of them disintegrate into particles and give their energy to various bugs and plants and animals. Yes, I did say that, Vladimir. This happens when, during its life on Earth, this energetic complex, the human soul, is in disharmony with the surrounding environment to such an extent that it represents a danger to earthly existence. The souls of the deceased preserve the complete complex when the imbalance has not yet reached a critical point. The more harmonious ones are the first to incarnate into earthly bodies. Unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer of them all the time within the universal space, and the program is now choosing from the best of a bad lot. But what if all the souls of my family line have disintegrated into particles? Then will none of them come to the family grove I plant? Since you exist, Vladimir, that means that your family chain has not been broken either. But what happens when a person is buried on the family homestead? When a person's body is buried on the homestead he himself established, his soul does not fly off into the universal darkness. It remains on the family homestead, after all. It is there that the person planted trees and communed with the land. The soul, which cannot see or hear anything but can feel, will sense the warmth that the plants give it, and besides that, the people. This person's descendants will recall him more often as they come into contact with what he created. Anastasia, I know of one instance when the little old mother of some people I know came to their homestead to visit them. She was a little over 80 years old. She'd just come to visit for a few days. She'd come to visit her daughter, just to see what in the world she and her husband had cooked up. Then she asked them to let her stay forever, and she stayed. She'd spend a long time sitting on a little bench. Sometimes she'd walk through the homestead's little forest. And one day she said to her daughter and son-in-law, "When I die, please don't take me off to the cemetery. Bury me here," and she pointed out the spot she herself had picked out. When this elderly woman died, the daughter and son-in-law carried out her request. What will happen to this elderly woman's soul if she didn't manage to plant anything on this homestead? Her soul will remain on the family homestead, even if all she did was sit on a little bench. She herself decided she wanted to be buried there. That means she was thinking about that before she died, and her relatives will visit the spot where she was laid to rest more often than they would go to a cemetery, and they will think of her more often. You must not bury a person on the family homestead against his will, even if he has done something there. If that happens, it is essential to forgiveness and go to the spot where he is buried and mentally explain to him why that was done and ask for it. Yes, Anastasia, it's an interesting situation. But way back when, did people know about this? Did they understand it? Of course they knew, Vladimir. Even in the not so distant past, many people had family crypts about that. But in earlier periods of human existence, cemeteries didn't exist at all. They came into existence when people appeared who had no family land at all. Artisans, domestics, various servants, and soldiers for hire. When they died, they needed, and so they'd carry their bodies off and toss them without their family members into the latrine. They'd throw sick animals, or they'd bury them in common graves. When the cities grew larger and many various families lived in them, including ones, then cemeteries began to appear. Well-to-do people would buy small plots of land where they would bury their deceased relatives, and then other people would do the same nearby. As a result, cemeteries began to be divided up into, to put in modern language, into upper class, middle class, and ordinary ones for servants. Those kinds of cemeteries still exist today. If you want to get into Vagankovo, cemetery in Moscow, you'll need to bring a lot of money and effort to bear to get a good plot, and the plots are assigned to be a special burial, are assigned by a special burial committee. End of that chapter. 4 words from the universal law. Anastasia, what about those 4 words from the universal law? The words dark-haired referred to. The ones that define the life's purpose of each individual man and of all mankind as a whole. Do you know what they are? Yes, Vladimir, I know these 4 words, those that define the common task facing mankind. Can you utter them for me now? I can. Then utter them. Anastasia rose to her feet and painstakingly speaking each word, said, "Perfect the dwelling land." "And that's it?" I said, disappointed. "Yes, that's it. To be perfectly honest, I thought they'd be some unusual magic words." These are unusual magic words from the universal law. These are the most important words of all the divine programs. With their help, it is possible to determine the degree to which both an individual person and mankind as a whole are necessary for the universe. With their help, it is possible to determine the usefulness or uselessness of the earthly laws conceived by people. Perfect the dwelling land means perfect yourself. All that exists within the universe and on earth represents through itself a united dwelling land, inseparably interconnected, and with man in the centre. Perfect the dwelling land means give birth to and raise children who are more perfected than you yourself. Each generation should be more perfected than the previous. For this to come about, the generation that comes before should present the following generation with a more perfected dwelling land. In perfecting the dwelling land, man perfects his own thought. The perfected dwelling land quickens and refines man's thought. In perfecting the dwelling land, man comes to know immortality. In perfecting the dwelling land, man turns the earth into the most perfected planet of the universe. Earthly perfection permits and helps man to perfect other planets of the universe. Universal perfection permits and helps man to create new worlds. Where is the edge of the universe? What will I do when I come to it? When I have filled everything with myself? When I create that which I have thought? A man of the Wellspring people asks God, and replied to his son, "My son, the universe is a thought. A dream was born of the thought and is partially visible as matter. When you come to the edge of everything, a new beginning and continuation shall your thought discover. Out of nothing will arise the new, beautiful birth of you and of the aspiration, reflecting in itself your soul and your dream. My son, you are endless, you are eternal, your creating dreams are within you." Anastasia fell silent, astounded by the unusual intonations and by the meaning of the words she'd uttered. I kept on looking at her, and with complete clarity I suddenly realized she isn't simply a taiga hermit living in the Siberian taiga, not simply an extraordinarily beautiful woman. Anastasia is a person from another dimension, a dimension where human intelligence triumphs. She senses and sees this dimension of intelligence. She is worthy of it, of a dimension in which a perfected, happy creator man makes the planet Earth the most beautiful planet in the universe, and the planets of the whole universe, delighted by his earthly creations, call to him to contemplate them too, to touch their surface ever so lightly, even with just their hand, and through a smile give them a future. And how unbearably painful it must be for her to look at today's earthly bacchanal. But she gave birth to 2 children and wasn't put off by the danger that the anti-rationality that rules today would swallow up the children. That means she's convinced that everything will change on its own, or that she'll change it herself. Anastasia, given your worldview, isn't it painful for you to look at today's reality? very painful, Vladimir, Anastasia whispered. Then how do you bear such pain? By creating pictures of a beautiful future, admiring them and delighting in them. The joy of beholding them vanquishes the pain, and what's more, there is even more benefit from such beholding. The way you imagine the future to be is the way it will come to pass. End of that chapter.